Hello and welcome back to the Quantum Health Connection podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Baldwin, with my amazing co-host, Heather Crimson. And today we have a legend. We have Amy Lansky with us today. She's the author of the first homeopathic book that I ever read called The Impossible Cure, which is an incredible book. Honestly, it's great for anybody who wants to just understand what homeopathy is. I highly recommend that they go and check it out. But Amy is also the graduate from the University of Rochester in 1977 with degrees in mathematics, computer science, and received her doctorate in computer science from Stanford University in 1983. After conducting research work in artificial intelligence at SRI International and NASA Research Center in Silicon Valley, she left the field in 1998 to pursue her interest in homeopathic medicine. The unusual move was prompted by the miraculous cure of her son's autism with homeopathy. Since that time, Amy has expanded her work to include explorations into consciousness, synchronicities, manifestation, and other modes of alternative healing, and most recently providing insight into ongoing dramatic changes in today's world. So she has an author of 2 books and a third on the way, The Impossible Cure and Active Consciousness. Amy, welcome to the show. We are so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Vanessa.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, it's always exciting to talk to the audience, to people interested in homeopathy, because really, I mean, my mission ever since I wrote Impossible Cure is to tell the world about it. That's one of my missions, but
Missions of many, right?
yeah. So it's so important, especially now, I think, because people are suffering from even more ill health than ever before, and the autism rate skyrocketing, of course. So
Yes.
so welcome everybody who's listening.
Well,
Yeah.
tell
So
us
tell
your
us,
story. Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
yeah, how did
I'll
you
tell
and
you my story.
homeopathy meet? How did you and homeopathy meet?
Well, okay, that's interesting. I mean, well, I think of it as God's intervention. You know, I had at the time, okay, so it all began in 1994. That's when it really began. So I have 2 sons. My older son is Isaac, my younger son is Max, and Max is the one who was autistic. And he was born in 1991, so he was one of the early cases, right at the point when it was starting to mushroom at that point, although there had been cases going back into the I think the 40s and 50s. But so we were looking for answers. There wasn't hardly anything about autism back then. And I was reading, there probably still is this alternative parenting magazine called Mothering.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
become less alternative, but at the time it was more,
Oh.
yeah. And they had an article by Judith Reichenberg-Ullman, this homeopath in the Seattle area, about treating ADD and ADHD with homeopathy. It was like a 3-page article. So at that point, Max was about, I guess he was 3, almost 3.5. And I was reading it in bed with my husband, and I just went, this ding. I had a ding moment.
Yeah.
And I said, read this article. And I said, this is what we're going to try. Because at that point, he was already in speech and language therapy. He was already kicked out of the nursery school. He was already had qualified for special education benefits. And interestingly, at that point, I had started reading. There was no understanding about diet or anything like that, but there was something called the Feingold diet at that point, and they were talking about milk and food colorings. And and he was addicted to milk. And I often tell parents who write to me about this, whatever your kid is like addicted to is often the thing that's eliminated. It's probably a suspect thing. So when he was 3, I took him off of milk, and at that point he started talking a bit, but he was more frankly autistic, like repeating echolalia, repeating what you were. So now it was few months later, I read the article. It was January of 95. Let's see. Okay, I guess it was the January of 95. And I found a homeopath who had just moved to the area because a friend of mine was an acupuncturist, and she said, go to this guy, he just moved there.
Mm.
And we were one of his first patients.
Mm.
And, you know,
And he got the remedy right.
Yeah, obviously.
got the remedy, and I did not, we didn't know anything. I had seen homeopathic remedies in the health food store, but I didn't know anything about it.
Mm.
And within a week, and he was doing LM dosing, right? And within a week, it was like very subtle. The whole process was slow and subtle. Parents shouldn't expect a miracle. I mean, things can happen, but usually with autism treatment is very difficult. And so we went to the therapist for his, he went twice a week to this therapy session. And she went, what did you do? Suddenly he was able to she would say things like, pick up the red ball and put it on the green chair, something like that. But he could only do one command. Suddenly he could do two commands.
Wow.
And it was just slow. It was the people who the people who saw us all the time could see it. It was like, what's going on? He suddenly became more present. And I write about this in my book. And by the way, my Impossible Cure is just a general introduction to homeopathy. It's not a how-to book. It talks about the philosophy, the history, the science, but it has a chapter about this story I'm telling you. But it's not a book about autism treatment, but it has this whole story I'm telling you.
I would recommend it to anybody who's interested in homeopathy.
Yeah.
Really
It's used as a first-year textbook at a lot of schools.
Yes, it really explains what homeopathy is at a very easy to understand level. Like you're like, oh, I get it, right? Yeah, it's really great.
So here, both my husband and I were computer scientists, researchers, and so we're like, this is like, how can this be happening? So we did this experiment because we saw this pattern of improvement with LMs, which is this liquid dosing. And about once a month, we would change the remedy to the next potency. So, and we would see this common pattern of response, which was a slight aggravation, which is like sort of this agitation kind of thing. And then it would smooth out, and then a big improvement. And then we knew to go on to the next level when that improvement was sort of receding.
Perfect.
So we did an experiment where he changed the potency. My husband changed the potency, but it didn't tell me when. And then I would make these observations.
Oh, wow.
To see if I could tell when he changed the potency. And I did exactly.
Wow. How great.
So then that kind of convinced us, wow, something is really going on here. And then my whole family started using homeopathy, obviously within a few months after that. And then we started seeing like all the amazing kind of things that can happen. And by like about 9 months after we began treatment, the therapist said, well, I don't like whatever you're doing is contributing more than this therapy. And then by the time he was 5, he lost his qualification for special education benefits. He was testing above age level, although he was still kind of a little peculiar at that point. He was behind. And I write about this, that he had been, when they kicked him out of the nursery school, I put him in a Montessori school. It was a very strict kind of Montessori school where he just would be off in his, in the corner doing his little things because he wasn't interacting with anybody, right? But then when he started getting better, this old lady was running it, and she was like, and he was immature. He hadn't interacted with the kids, and so he started like being not precocious and misbehaving, and like She says, oh, he was so well behaved before. Can you just put him back the way he was before?
Right. So this is maybe some of the aggravations that were going on, or
No,
possibly.
no, it was he had improved. He was trying to interact with the kids, but he was
Oh,
so awkward and
Like he had to catch up developmentally. He hadn't had the
yeah,
practice,
yeah.
the
yeah.
opportunity.
So, okay, left that school, went to a different Montessori school.
Perfect.
And like he was just, he would use toilet talk and, say duty and this and that, and they just thought, oh, he's just this little. So by the time he was 5, he stayed in the Montessori school through kindergarten. And then by the time he was in 1st grade, he went to the private school where my other son went.
Wow.
And he, for a few years there, he had some kind of, I had him tested. It was very nebulous. Does he have auditory processing things? Because he would not get oral instructions easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so the teacher would have to make sure he got the instruction. But then, we changed remedies.
Right.
He was on that first remedy for about, let's say, 2 years. And then we just went to other remedies and just normal, actually, dry dosing. And by the time he was in 3rd grade, 4th grade, no problems.
That's
Never
amazing.
anything from the teachers again. And it's very interesting. I saw various things, when this all initially began, I really didn't know about the issue of vaccine injury. But as time went by, things happened where I think it was coming out of his system. And I'm going to tell you that some of this isn't in the book. Well,
Okay, great.
So like one thing, at one point he got whooping cough. And I actually don't think he was a DPT injury. I think he was an MMR injury. But anyway, but there was always an improvement at some point when these things would happen. Then when
so it would improvement after the whooping cough, right?
yeah. And
That's common in
gave him
homeopathy.
a remedy for it.
Yeah, that's very common in homeopathy when we have acutes. These are Heather and I to call them activations of the immune systems, and the acute is actually the healing, and then it actually up levels a person's health. And on the other side of the acute, we find that they have big improvements in their health, in the mental, emotional, and the physical.
And by the way, he had all his vaccines up, except stopping. He didn't get the 5-year-old ones because at that point I was starting to learn about awareness. But this is interesting. But to go to kindergarten, they wanted the titer test for was it the TB titer test? What is the thing they give it? Anyway, and they did it and they missed, or they did it wrong, and they did it twice, and he had a regression from that.
Oh yeah.
I guess it was the TB test. And then we just started back on the remedy and he came out of it. But that was kind of scary that he regressed.
Absolutely.
Well, he never was vaccinated after that. So then when he was around 8 or 9, he got what I believe was this mild case of measles. He had, a rash on his chest. And by the way, I'm old enough to have had all these childhood diseases, right? Thank God, I gotta say. Anyway.
Yeah, it's actually healthier for us if we get these epidemics in our childhood and are stronger.
Yeah. And then when this is the most interesting in a way, when he was in 10th grade, and by the way, this is also a common thing. After he went through puberty, it was like a transformation. Often with these kids, if they're recovering, puberty is a big change and improvement. And he became very more popular socially, but he got in 10th grade the mumps.
Wow.
One-sided mumps. And I know I had mumps. I went, oh my God, it's the mumps. I can't believe it.
That's amazing. It's so exciting. And most people wouldn't understand why that's exciting. They'd be like, oh no. But in actuality, that's him getting stronger and removing what does not serve him.
So he, after the mumps, and he just kept him home from a week. He went from like a B student to like A student, top of the class, super
Wow.
popular in high school. I mean,
Each acute he had, Amy, he just shed, and his body was releasing those toxins that were suppressed by the
yeah,
vaccine, or that were implanted by the vaccines.
yeah.
Mhm.
So it's interesting. So that's the story of Max. I mean, I'll just say he went on he went to USC film school, which is really the best in the country, to become an animator. And now he still lives in LA, although I was thinking of leaving, I hope. Um, he works and does it's called motion design, advertising for movies and TV and stuff. And he's done social media for like some major events and TV shows and things like that.
Amazing. Amazing.
So yeah. So that's his story. And he's like 33 now.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
It's incredible the power of homeopathy and so grateful for you for being, willing to try something different, right? And
Yeah.
then sharing your story with the world. That is such an important thing that you're doing and such a beautiful gift you're sharing with the world because it's so needed because there are so, as you know, autism rates, like you said, are climbing and people need to know that there are other options for their children and there are other ways to support them. So I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for you and the work that you're doing.
So obviously what happened to us completely changed our lives.
Hmm.
Totally. And by the way, we were totally, into conventional allopathic medicine. My husband's father is a doctor, um, um, which makes my husband, very skeptical of conventional medicine.
I bet.
Grew up with a doctor. He heard all the stories from his father. Anyway, so so I started studying homeopathy. And it kind of all coincided with my lab at NASA, kind of having huge political turmoil. And I had invested actually in a startup of a friend of mine and made some money. And so I realized I could stop working. My husband was still working. So that's when I wrote my book. And it was really a leap of faith. People at the time did not know who I was. They thought I was insane. At the time, you had to do a print book. You couldn't. Now we have print on demand, but like 5,000 copies of Impossible Cure Land on my driveway on a giant pallet. And like people going, yeah, I just knew, okay. They were sold in a year.
Oh,
Mm.
wow. Good.
Another 5,000 sold the next year.
Mhm.
Mhm.
This is already 22 years ago. It
Mhm.
came out.
Wow.
So I studied homeopathy, and then I got involved in sort of politically. I became a board member of the National Center for Homeopathy.
Mhm.
And then in California, there's the health freedom movement. Now the
Mhm.
health freedom movement's more focused on like against vaccine mandates and stuff. But at the time, it was all about allowing practitioners to practice without being threatened of being charged with practicing medicine without a license. And
Mhm.
so, and there aren't, I don't know how many states now have a practitioner health freedom laws, maybe about 15. So we didn't have one in California. So our homeopath at the time founded the California Health Freedom Coalition. And I
Mhm.
was on the board. And then I testified in Sacramento as part of this thing to allow, under various restrictions, alternative practitioners to practice legally, unlicensed practitioners, like
Wow.
homeopaths, but also other ones. And and we passed it. But of course, it was all about money. We had a huge deep pocket sponsor of the bill. And so that was my first experience in Sacramento. The second one was in 2015 when we lost our vaccine exemptions.
Oh,
Yep.
right.
Husband testified in that. So that's a whole different story.
Wow.
I've
Wow.
given you a hint of well, before our conversation how that all happened. But so anyway, yeah, just crazy. Our life just has been just gone from one amazing thing to another.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
can tell you many stories.
And you've even left California in search of more the preservation of your sovereignty and health freedom and all of that, right? So that
Yeah.
speaks volumes as to the state of our country. And I mean, I don't know if things are changing now or what will happen in the future, but it's really serious. I think that unfortunately becomes so polarized, but we're really talking about fundamental, basic sovereignty that we should have a choice as to what comes into our body. And I think there's so many things that pervade our environment now that we don't even know what's out there and all these crazy things happening, the fog and the mosquitoes and God knows what else. And so, and then we don't even get to frequencies. So, but I admire your convictions, Amy, and following your truth and writing and at great cost. Probably you said you lost friends before we started recording. I mean, even your husband probably had to face all of those beliefs that he had about allopathic medicine. And then, you ended up moving in order to basically seek some peace and equanimity, right? And some freedom.
Yeah, I don't know how I became such a rabble rouser.
Your experiences brought you to that. Really, it was your
I
life's
know.
path, and I
I
think that you were meant to walk that path, right? Like, I honestly believe that. I mean, I know that I haven't read your second book, but I have a feeling you'd probably concur that, Max was meant for you and that was meant to happen. And this was meant for this is the unfolding that was meant to happen for you. And you were meant to write that book and help so many people. I mean,
I
there's
know.
no coincidences, really.
For those of us who are in the autism world, what happened with COVID was like no big surprise.
Yeah.
Because we've been on this path for many, many years. And as homeopaths,
Hmm.
for many, many years, it was just much worse. So what was I going to say? So like, because when my book came out, I'll tell you now how we got even more involved in the health freedom movement, although in sort of a background way. Um, uh, somebody was writing to me to find out about the vaccine injuries because they thought their kid was vaccine injured, and they read in my book that we were computer scientists.
Hmm.
And so at the time, this was it was probably at the time when the VAERS data, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which was legislated in 1986, but when they gathered this data, they had to make it public, but it was basically a bunch of files that the CDC was not really usable or accessible by a normal human being. You could download these many files that had to be combined and this and that. So I say to my husband, who's a true at the time, like almost a world-known hacker, if we call a hacker programmer. Like I was more of a theoretician. He was like very practical. I said, this guy's writing to me. Can you download this data? Like over a weekend, he put the thing together.
Wow.
And he said, yeah, this kid got a hot lot. It's called a lot of vaccines that caused a lot of injury.
Mm.
So then this was okay. That was there was no website. There was no access to it. Even the CDC didn't have a website. So like a year later or so, he created the first website. It was probably in like 2003. It's probably about 2004 to access the VAERS data.
Wow.
And
So your husband basically created the VAERS database, yes?
the website.
The website rather. Okay.
Right, because the database is maintained and everything by the CDC.
Okay.
It's public, so anybody can download the data, but they didn't have a database, a website.
Mm.
So he created the first way to search it so that, and by the way, the CDC people were using his website too. They didn't even have a website at the time. About 3 years later, they made a website, So they do have a website, but initially that website was incomplete. It sort of summarized, didn't really give you all of it. I'm not sure if it still does that, but my husband's site, which is at metalerts.com, or is it metalerts.org? Metalerts.org. But most people access it now. Over the years, he's become affiliated with the National Vaccine Information Center, which is nvic.org. So if you go to nvic.org and you say, I want to look at the VAERS data, it goes to his website. And like all the organizations that talk about this data, including CHD, Children's Health Defense, they all use his website, and the CDC researchers, where you've heard, use his website because it's just a better website.
Wow.
Even though it is difficult to use, it's so complicated.
So now you guys have access to all this information. It's like, what do you do with all that, right?
So, it was just a fun exercise for my husband initially. And, but because he had this data, and he's not a medical professional. He just is, I'm just a nerd putting this data in my website. And that's all. He doesn't comment about it. All the writers use his data, use this data, but he doesn't, he tries to stay out of the fray. Let them make their statements, write their articles. I'm just making this available to you.
Right. So he doesn't let it affect him.
It's totally legal. By law, the government has to make it available, and he does it. So, but because of this, that's the second time we went to Sacramento. He testified in front of this hearing. So fast forward to 2015, which was in a way, now in retrospect, it was like a portent of things to come. A few years later, but they were going to remove our we had every kind of exemption in California. We had philosophical, religious, and medical, and they were going to remove both religious and philosophical. This is the SB 255. So because he was the data guy, they asked him to testify. And that was my red pill moment, as people say. The things that happened that day, it was so traumatic to me that I was sick for like 2 months afterwards.
Wow.
It was actually, Kennedy was there. A lot of people were there. There were hundreds of parents there with injured children, dead children, children in wheelchairs. Some of the parents, doctors whose kids were killed or injured. And so, so the way it worked was we were in this hearing room, but there were thousands of people watching it elsewhere and everything. Anyway, and my husband, there were 3 people speaking on each side, and then they had to open it up for public comment. So each person could come down and say just where they were from and if they were for or against it. And this went on for 4 or 5 hours. We were sitting in this room. There were all these altercations, like parents, one man was screaming, my son was killed and blah, blah, blah. And police took him out. I mean, the whole thing was very, and I would say that 95% were against this bill. And then, and just like that, they just passed it right there.
I was going to say it went through anyway, even though 95% were against it. How about that?
Right in front of us, like it was in the same room. Right afterwards, they just rubber stamped it. Every Democrat, which is all of California, voted for it. There were 2 Republicans, they voted against it. And then we go home. It was so disturbing. The San Francisco Chronicle, which I had gotten forever, just printed on the front page lies about what had happened in the room I was sitting in. And I realized, man, government and the media completely corrupt, right?
Yeah, and you realize that right then and there when you experience something like that, that's for sure, right?
And so it was like, okay. My whole view of reality shifted that day.
I bet.
Mhm.
So anyway, so time went on, and then the whole COVID thing. And up to COVID, uh the website hits were 50,000 a day, went up to 500,000 a day.
Mm,
Wow.
insane.
That's insane.
Mhm.
So it's just, so anyway, so this meant we were getting this data just after it was released, and we were the first people to see the injuries happening
Right.
that were being censored, really. I mean, but it was the government data.
Mhm.
And so
Mm.
and we weren't going to get it. Up to that point, our friends thought, oh, Amy and Steve, because we were very embedded. We were like in the 80s, we were the party house of Silicon Valley. We're friends with a lot of people who became, Silicon Valley well-known people. And so people respected us as computer scientists, but they were like, oh, they're into that wacky homeopathy. And
Right.
yes, Steve does that database on the side, But suddenly, the Bay Area was we drove the most, maybe except New York, the most closed down place
Mhm.
in the
Oh, I
country.
bet. Yeah.
Really bad. You were in
Mhm.
Monterey, right?
Mhm.
It was nothing compared to like around Stanford, which is where
Right.
we
I
it's the
bet.
first county to shut down. So
Oof.
some of our friends were actually mad at us that we didn't want to get vaccinated.
Oh,
But
that's okay. You're allowed to make your own choices.
the most they they weren't mad. They knew that they weren't surprised,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but they would exclude us from everything. Or
Mhm.
they weren't excluding other people, right?
Right. Yeah. They excluded you because they had fear. And that fear was driven by the media and was driven by everything else. And that fear was intentional. And the fear that was the frequency of 2020 was fear. And
Yeah,
that's why I
people
think
wouldn't
so many
even.
people responded so well to Arsenicum album because
Yes,
there was
that's
such a
true.
fear state. The whole country was in a fear state. Everybody needed Arsenicum album at that time, probably if they had COVID, because when you got it, you were so scared, right?
Did you know they gave it to in one of the provinces in India? They gave it to everybody, and they had the lowest rates in India.
I bet it did because that remedy makes the most sense for that virus. It makes the most sense. So because
So
that is the fear
anyway, so
frequency.
then as I told you guys before, interestingly, that the summer of 21, some of the people who were really like a friend of ours who's MD PhD, who is actually the chief science officer of Microsoft.
Mm.
He invited us to come, even though he knew we weren't vaccinated, but he's a doctor. See, if you're really educated, he trusted that the vaccine would protect him,
Mm.
which it should. At the time, we thought that. People thought that. He said, come up to my summer house. So we went. He wasn't hugging us, but we slept in his house. He wasn't afraid of us, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So we drove up to, it was in the island outside of Seattle. It was the first time we left the Bay Area. I mean, even like our little neighborhood since COVID began. And the minute you left the Bay Area, it was like a different world. When you left California, you were like in a completely different world. It was like, wow, what? I can't even believe this. You mean you don't have to live like you're in danger every so and yeah, okay, when you're the big cities, people tended to be more afraid, but like out in the country, it was like, what COVID, right? And we said, we come back from this trip and we go, what? I think we have to leave.
Yep.
I think we have to leave. A couple months later, we get on the road and we drove the country for, look, we took two major trips, two round trips. So we we went to dozens of cities, and we ended up we ended up moving to the South, a place I'd never been. We live in Greenville, South Carolina. We love it, love it. It is a very up and coming city now. People are starting to hear about it.
Yep.
It's a beautiful city. It's one of the few places that's really, it was like a city that was in ruins like 40 years ago, and it's rejuvenated itself. It's a rejuvenated, almost a remodeled city. It's beautiful. People are so friendly and so nice. And it was like, and I think they only shut down during COVID for a few months, and that was it. So, so we transferred our life. We lived in hotels on the road, driving our little Prius with a roof box for months and months. And by the way,
Sounds like a fun adventure, Amy. I love it.
we are in our late 60s. I'll be 70 this year. And we moved here for good into our house here in 2.5 years ago. So yeah.
I'm noticing all the beautiful books you have in the background.
Yeah.
I can see you're a very avid reader. One of my questions.
Well, it's all that. This is all my research stuff. Like one section's homeopathy and one stuff is my consciousness stuff.
I'm curious what your favorite books are and why.
My favorite, which books?
Yeah, is that too many books to answer? You have any
Well,
favorite?
I tend to read mostly nonfiction, but now I read like one fiction book at a time. For fiction, I like historical fiction. I like to learn, but like I'm the type of person who's usually reading about 10 books at the same time.
Yeah.
And I'm a slow reader, so I just sort of like, oh, I feel like reading this one, that one, this one.
Same here.
I do the same. Yep, I do the same.
So yeah, you're into frequency. There's this frequency book. What is it called? This book about that woman who uses tuning forks.
Yeah, Eileen McCusick.
Yes, I'm reading her book.
That's amazing. So good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So let me tell you a little bit about my second book.
Yes, please.
Yes.
And I'll tell you a little bit about, do you want to ask me questions? I'm just talking too much here.
You're fine. It's all good.
Doing great. Tell us about your second book. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. My second book is called Active Consciousness. Basically, after I guess when it was about in 2000, my first book came out in 2003. Around 2005, I was going through menopause. I was having dizzy stuff. Anyway, I decided to try this EFT.
Yeah, emotional freedom technique.
Yeah. And actually, the person I went to became a very close friend of mine, and her husband taught this meditation class about self-awareness, and then I got very involved in this form of meditation, and then it's a whole nother story. Over the years, we've known a lot of people who are involved in scientific study of psychic phenomena.
Yeah.
Interestingly, when I was at Stanford, I was friendly with Elizabeth Targ, whose father is Russell Targ, who was the remote viewing guy, who did all the remote viewing experiments at SRI when I worked at SRI, Stanford Research Institute. And so I was always intrigued by psi phenomena. And just because God really intervenes in our life, I got to just say. At one point, my husband was working at this research institute, and he started doing a few, like the software to do some of these experiments for both Russell Targ and Dean Radin, who is the chief science officer of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And so he was the person who implemented some of these experiments to show that like people like know what's going to happen before it happens. So so I was interested in that. Over the years, through unbelievable weird synchronicities, we met Rupert Sheldrake,
Mhm.
morphic field. So
Nice.
I can't tell you how these things happen to us. And
It just came into your field, Amy. They're meant to be.
so my second book, Active Consciousness. Oh, this even began before homeopathy. Let's see, or maybe it was right. Yeah, it was before homeopathy. I was watching an episode of the first episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where they go into this wormhole, and then they realize that time and space are not relevant in higher dimensions. So I stayed up all night one night thinking about the fourth dimension.
Mm.
And I came up with this theory about how the psi phenomena work if we have access to the fourth dimension, spatial dimension. And so I wrote this book, this paper. This was before homeopathy, called Consciousness as an Active Force. That if we have a four-dimensional aspect to ourselves, then we can affect the trajectory through space and time. So our consciousness, if it's in the fourth dimension, can affect how the future unfolds.
Yep.
So
I'm
so
sorry.
my second book introduces these ideas in a very broad way, and I talk about all these people, all these experiments. I talk about Kabbalah. I have meditation exercises, and I relate the phenomenon of synchronicity to the way homeopathy works.
Ooh, cool.
Because what is synchronicity? A synchronicity is when, okay, let's imagine that the world is based in this field. Things are related, have a vibration, and certain fields of meaning have a vibration, right? So, so if you're thinking, if you're like in love with somebody, you're in the love vibration or whatever. And what a synchronicity is when two things with the same vibration co-occur in time and space. So that's why, like Jung, who invented the term synchronicity, his patient was talking about a dream, a certain symbolic dream that was related to this beetle in Egyptian mythology. And she had a dream about the beetle. And as she's telling the dream, that same beetle comes into the room, knocks on the window and comes into the room. It's because this vibration of the meaning of the dream and the beetle and everything, and brought this beetle into the room. It's a synchronicity. Okay. So what is homeopathy? The person is in a state of vibration of their disease state. The remedy is the same vibration. So homeopathy is the medicine based on synchronicity. You're taking the vibration of the medicine that's similar to the vibration of the patient and sticking them together, and somehow that heals them. So basically, it's a law of nature that if you take two things of similar vibration, they come together, it has a curative effect. It's like, that's mind-boggling. It's intense. Intense.
It is.
It is. And yep. A lot of people can't, I mean, it takes a bit of surrender and acceptance and openness to be able to wrap your brain around it, because we're so conditioned to be materialists, and see what's in front of us as measurable and all that kind of stuff. So it's hard to embrace, I think, for people, and you have to have faith, and a lot of it is, what can your mind be open to, right? This kind of makes me curious about the intersection. I know you've heard of the telepathy tapes, you've maybe listened to them, but
I just only listened to them a few months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was gonna,
yeah.
I'm gonna ask about if you ever had that instances with Max about that.
Actually, while he was still autistic, there was an incident where he had a psychic perception. I was thinking about somebody, and he said, you're thinking about, he mentioned this person who he really didn't know. I mean, at that point, he was barely verbal. Maybe he was 5. And he said, you're thinking about this person. the name.
Interesting. What did you think of the telepathy tapes? I'm so curious. I just recently listened to. I'm not
You know
fully.
what? I'm not surprised. Okay, because
Yeah, me neither.
from my point of view, the autistic kids are basically not in their physical, the ones who are not speaking, especially, they're not in their physical body. They're in their etheric astral body. And according to my theory, the astral body is in this fourth dimensional space. And so they have access to everything. They're psychic because they're in their astral body. So this brings me to my third book, okay?
Yes,
yes. Okay, if people want to read what I have to say, because lately I've been writing also about society and what's been going on, they go to, I have a whole new unified website, amylansky.com. So AMYLANSKY.com. So all this information about all my books. So I'm finishing up my third book, and I view it. I wrote most of it before COVID, and then I got derailed by what happened to us. So I'm finishing it now, and I've reoriented it in a way by what happened to us, because I think what's being done to us is that we're trying, I think for whatever reason, people are trying to separate us from our greater power.
Yep, absolutely.
So okay, so the book is really my cosmology about the energy bodies, why we're here on this planet, about reincarnation, all this stuff. And then most of the book, I view that we have the physical body, the etheric body, which is where I think the main operation of homeopathy is, on the etheric body.
Agreed. Yeah.
And then the astral body, mental body, causal body. The astral, mental, causal body continue on after we die. It's my cosmology. And so the rest of the book is sort of a guidebook to many forms of alternative medicine, including ones that work on the physical level. So the thing is, where is your problem? If you're sick, where is your problem? Is your problem in the physical, the etheric? Is it really an astral body problem, which is like, if it's if it's really rooted in your emotions, is it there? So, it's really like a guidebook to all these possible types of therapies you might try, with tips about hints that indicate, okay, this is real. Like, for example, if your problem began with a very bad emotional event, you might treat it on the physical level. That's what most people do. But
Right.
really,
They don't connect it.
And treat it on this emotional level, because that's the root of your problem. And in homeopathy, we understand this. They call it a causative event that causes the disease, right?
And homeopathy works on both the physical, mental, and emotional. It's working on all planes. And that's the huge difference, that, it connects everything. We're not a closed system, we're an open, and all the things are connected within us that are going on. So if you've got anxiety and diarrhea, those are likely connected.
Right. Well, your etheric body is your interface between your physical body and the higher bodies. So that's why homeopathy is so powerful. It's the interface between the higher level bodies and the physical. So
I'm curious, because of all these things you're saying, how would you say what homeopathy is? Like, the way that you're explaining it seems so deep.
How would I explain it to, another person?
Yeah.
It's
such a hard question, right?
I usually don't get into all that. I say, very simply, I might start by saying, homeopathy is defined by its name. It means similar suffering. So it means that if you take a substance that causes some symptoms, that the symptoms that you are having, then it can cure those symptoms. And I usually use the example of coffee, because here I am drinking my coffee, because why do we like to drink coffee? Because it makes us alert. It makes our mind active and acute, but it can also cause diarrhea and heart palpitations and stuff. So what state are you in when you're in that state. Let's say after a fun party and you're all excited and you can't go to sleep because your mind is very active and you have diarrhea and you're having heart palpitations. That's when the remedy made from coffee
Right.
could help you fall asleep, but not if you can't fall asleep for other reasons.
Right. If it was due to grief or something else, you'd have to think of it.
Right. And then I say, but you wouldn't like drink a cup of coffee to go to sleep. You would, and that's why the remedies are so, it's just the energy of coffee. They're so dilute, you're just getting the energy of coffee. And that's usually what I say. And then I might give the example how they give hyperactive kids essentially speed.
Right.
Exactly.
Which is really like
Yeah.
a form of like cures like.
It is. It's a crude form of
But it's in the crude
homeopathy.
form, which if people don't know, the crude means it's not, homeopathy is ultra diluted, right? It's diluted and succussed down to just the form of an energetic imprint, is what I like to say. So there's no toxicity. The toxicity is removed. And unfortunately, in these medications, if they're using like cures like in allopathy, they are still using it in the crude form, which then has toxic side effects.
Yeah. And and by the way, a lot of the medicines used in allopathy got their start as homeopathic remedies.
Yes.
And doctors don't understand, how can this work? Why does Ritalin calm?
They don't know it.
It's
They don't
all
understand the principle
similar.
of like cures like, right? Yeah.
Like cures like. It's just that it's not so good to take it in toxic doses.
Exactly.
Right. That's the problem. Well, that was the gift that Hanuman gave, is that he was figured out dilution and succussion, and that he had the ability to, take away those toxic side effects and just leave the curative form or principle there. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to touch base on what you were saying, because I wanted to make sure I got it all. Amy, is in the last part of your third book is almost sounds like a quantum like rubric or diagnostic sort of template, if you will, to help people understand where, like, what plane their malady is manifesting in. Is that right?
Yeah, although it's more like they're sort of like tips,
Okay.
It's not using some instrument or something like that. It's just saying, for example, like if you had this event or if it's has these characteristics, your problem, you might consider this and that. And I also say, I mean, personally now I start with what I consider astral level therapies, like the Sedona method or other psychological methods, going, why is this happening?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, even before homeopathy, right?
Okay. Okay.
Because if I can solve it by just going, I got this headache because I forgot, but I was upset by this something that happened, then it can get rid of it right away. I don't even have to take a remedy. I'm usually on some constitutional remedy, so I don't like to interfere.
Right. You work in a very, not that you work, but you practice, and your son practiced all in a very classical way, right? Your family practices in a very classical way. We do too, one remedy at a time, and not to interfere. So if things come up, I don't like my clients to interfere unless, of course, it's needed, right? So there are times that things are needed with other remedies. So we just stick with the one constitutional remedy, and that can change over time, of course, right? We're not just one.
Yeah.
We're not just one remedy. I think I would like to reiterate that to people, because they think that they're going to get their one remedy and everything's going to be fixed. And I'm like, this is a process. You have many layers. You have many constitutional layers. You're going to pop in and out of them. It's a process for sure. Yeah.
It is. And homeopathy, sadly, is a difficult practice.
Yes,
and it's when you get it right, it can be a miracle, but it's pretty hard to get right. And everybody is different, right? You don't even know what potency to give somebody. There's like different guidelines, but you just never know. Some people, interestingly, I've become more and more sensitive over the years. Like, this is pretty weird, but like I can get a dose of a remedy now just by holding it. Hold the vial for like an hour in my hand or so. I know.
Well, the energetic transfer, you don't have to actually ingest anything. It's all there.
Yeah. So I'm very cautious, what I do.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
no.
this is kind of a weird question, but that makes me wonder that when you have all your remedies in a case together, is that like a bad thing? Because they're all, I mean, how does that affect each other?
I don't know.
It's a good question, Heather. I never thought of that before.
No, but I'll tell you this, I don't have them in my bedroom. I keep them, and they tend to be contained in these plastic things, and maybe intention makes a difference. I don't know. It's all
I
very
think intention makes
mysterious.
a very big difference. Whenever I take a remedy or I give my children a remedy, I always set strong intentions with it beforehand. And I'm sure you've heard of the work of like Veda Austin and Dr. Emoto and how you can set intention into water and all of that. So
Yeah.
I also do that, and I think that it actually can make the remedy work better. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, intention.
Mhm.
I had a homeopath once said to me that when he got a new patient, if he could not feel that this patient was going to get better, couldn't really
Yeah. As a
see it.
practitioner.
As
Mm.
a practitioner, he would not keep them as a patient
Aw.
because the
That's
intent,
some integrity there. I like that.
yeah, the intention
Yeah.
of the practitioner makes a difference too.
I 1,000,000% agree with that, right? You have to, as a practitioner, you have to be able to hold the space and the possibility and have that for what's possible for your clients. And if you're like gonna thinking like, oh, this person's never gonna get better, right? After you even prescribe, then they're not, right? Because that actually matters hugely. And it also your intention of when you take something matters greatly too. If you're like, I mean, I actually have seen homeopathy work without intention, of course, right? Like you've seen it on plants, I've seen it on dogs, I've seen it on young children. They're not really having an intention and it still
Yeah,
works. But
yeah,
I think that if you have an intention that this is going to support me, it's going to work better. So, mm,
definitely. And I think that the parents, like for autistic kids, I had a radio show I did for several years. It's
mhm.
on you can access it through my website, and um, the the intention of the parents is so important in the cure of these kids
Yeah,
because it's a long process. And I talk about how a lot of, sadly, a lot of parents have gotten very invested in their kids being sick
right.
because it's their identity.
Yes, and then that's the same thing with people who have chronic illness. It becomes their identity, and then there's something that's keeping them sick by holding on to it, and they don't know how to let go of that.
So it's really important that you have a vision of at least improvement
Yeah.
while at the same time accepting them where they're at.
That's a very fine line to accept and to hold the vision of what could be possible, right? That's a beautiful words of advice and really an important part. And I also think, and I think I've heard you say this as well, that it when you're healing something with a child with a chronic illness like that or autism or something that's really severe, we really need to look at the whole family system and support the whole family system, right?
Yeah, because you know what will happen? Like that story about how Max changed and we had to change the nursery school. It's the whole family will shift.
Yeah.
The dynamic in the family will shift. And that's why it's important, I would think, that everybody go to the homeopath.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I
Mm-hmm.
agree. I
Yeah.
know there are some homeopaths who will not treat children with like special needs unless the parents also agree to come as well, which I think is a good idea because it's going to start from what with them as well too, getting the support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yep.
So
Yeah.
what advice would you give for a parent who, say they have an autistic child, what advice would you give to them?
Um, well, I usually say find a good homeopath
Yeah.
and really be careful because a lot of people are saying they're doing homeopathy, but haven't been trained in it, or they really don't know what they're doing. And there's not enough homeopaths, unfortunately. And that even for a very experienced homeopath, it's treatment of autism is difficult. So I always say to parents too, to use their intuition,
Mhm.
um, and when selecting, like what feels right.
Mhm.
And even if they're not seeing any improvement over like many months, like give it like 6 months at least if you can, but then switch, because it really depends a lot on the ability of the homeopath to understand the case. And it's not always so easy, even for a very good homeopath. So, and it's like a rapport. It's sort of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a resonance. It's like there needs to be a resonance, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I myself have been, let me think, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've had over the years 4 different homeopaths. Partly because, well, moving or whatever, but it's also because I'm so well known now that can be an obstacle.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And so and it's like, I just want a homeopath. I'm just a normal person. Yeah. So so it's hard to find. I mean, I've been with the same one now for 10, 20 years, but like, I guess 10 years. It's hard to maintain like sort of this friendship or professional respect while also being a patient.
Right. Because you can get too intertwined, I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah. So somehow my homeopath, who's a very spiritual person and very humble and stuff, we're able to separate our friendship, and we are friends, from when she's my homeopath. And part of it is I insist on paying her. You see, it's a mistake to not pay your homeopath, because then it's not a professional relationship. It's like you're not your practitioner.
Yeah, 100%.
So sometimes we Zoom as friends, and sometimes I see her now through Zoom. She's still in California, and sometimes now it's an appointment. It's a totally different relationship.
Can I ask you, what was some of your personal shifts with homeopathy?
My personal what?
Shifts with homeopathy?
Shifts. Oh, okay. Oh man.
Just one or two.
I remember my first significant thing was I used to have like really bad allergies, and they went away. Although sometimes now I still have a bit, but I'm much less anxious than I used to be. I don't know if that's old age. This is one reason I'm not a practitioner. I did study to be a practitioner. I did a little bit, but I'm a little too neurotic. I get, to me, it was so interesting intellectually, but the day-to-day and the dealing with the patients, it made me too anxious to deal with it. And dealing with my own family was sufficient. And I just felt like by my nature, I'm a researcher and a writer. I'm not a practitioner, and they're very different things, right? I do help my family out in acutes or a friend or something occasionally, but I'm very hesitant to. What else? Let's see. I don't know. It's just so many weird things. When something miraculous happens, I can't believe this. I still say that. And Steve says, you should read this book called Impossible Cure. It's like,
That was so funny. So cute.
both my kids he's really been transformed. Steve has.
Your husband? Wow.
Yeah. And Isaac too. And I've seen really horrible aggravations too. Like one time, like I think Isaac had some dental work, and this friend of ours who's a homeopath, and he shouldn't have done it without telling me, he gave him like a 10 m of Hepar sulf or something. And suddenly I was so angry. Isaac was like freaking out totally within minutes, like way too high a dose. And it went away, but I was like, he said to me, now I really believe in homeopathy.
Yeah, you don't know how sensitive somebody is. Like, I know the first remedy my son had, I gave it a very high potency, and I was like, it was too high. Like I know that now because he's more sensitive. So LMs are much better for him. So
Yeah.
it's getting to know the patient and getting to know. So when the first dose, I mean, you can do that because you don't know. You really don't know how the person's going to respond to homeopathy. You can't. Like it's impossible to know. You can kind of like
Yeah, yeah,
think,
yeah.
but
It was a shot. It was a total proof
yeah, yeah.
of to him.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is powerful. At
Yeah.
the time he was like, in high school or something. And so there's, oh yeah, okay, whatever, I'll take this. And it's like, okay.
It's funny.
Um, well, I
When do you think your third book will be available?
My goal is the fall.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing the final. I don't know. I got an amazing foreword by one of my heroes. This guy, you probably don't know who he is. His name is Father Sean O'Leary.
Oh,
He's become very well known. I never knew him in Palo Alto. He is a Catholic priest. By the way, I'm Jewish, but nevertheless, I'm not sure he's affiliated with the Catholic Church anymore, but he lives now as sort of a hermit on top of a mountain way up in Northern California.
amazing.
And he is, I can't explain it. Go to his website. It's called Spirits in Spacesuits.
That
Spirits in
sounds
Space.
perfect.
And his cosmology of reality and everything is very similar to my own. And
Cool.
while we were on the road, Steve and I would listen to his talk,
Yeah.
and they really were very good for us. And so I've had luck. This has happened to me more than once in my life, but I just wrote to him, wrote to him. I said, I wrote this book and I'm a big fan, and will you write the foreword to my book? And
wow.
yes. And so I'm very excited because he's become more and more known. And so I'm very excited that he wrote this foreword to my book.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on that. And
Yeah.
congratulations on, all the things you've accomplished with your books. I really can't wait to read your other book, Active Consciousness.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it existed. Heather and I were talking about having you on the podcast, and she looks up, she goes, she has a second book. And then we start looking at, but I'm like, I need to get that book. Like it's going to happen. Because honestly, Impossible Cure is, and I've read a lot of books on homeopathy, but it really is one of my favorites. I mean, and now I'm reading it again a second time because I'm like, why haven't I read this again? So I picked
I
it
should
up
read it again.
and I started reading it again, and I was just like, and I'm like underlining and starring all like my favorite things. So like you really did a beautiful job. So if
Thank you.
I will recommend it. I recommend it all the time. So yeah, it's an amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Angelica, we were telling you, asked me to give this talk that more pertains to active consciousness. And I was like, oh man, I don't think I've read it in 10 years, or over 10 years. So I'm rereading it now too. And I'm going, wow, I wrote this. I can't believe it.
I love that. I love it.
So,
Amy,
anyway.
we really appreciate your time today, but we want to be conscious of it as well. And yeah, we could talk to you for hours, but we want to be conscious of your time, and we want to, let people know like where to find your information. I think you mentioned you have your website. Is your website, Amy Lansky? That's the best place to go, right? To find all your information.
Yeah, my new website, finally, they're all merged into one website. It's all there.
Perfect.
amylansky.com.
Yeah,
So
perfect. And yeah, thank you so much. Any last parting words of wisdom? Or
well, I always have this phrase in my newsletter. There's hope with homeopathy.
oh, I
Oh,
love that. That's a
oh,
perfect way to end.
beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a great gift to the world, because in this world, there's at least hope with homeopathy, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So there's hope with homeopathy.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. This was really fun. Keep at the work. We need more homeopaths.